My name is Mark Bolinsky. I'm the Chief Technology Architect here at InterSystems, and joining me is Murray Oldfield. He's one of our principal architects. We work together. We're pretty much responsible for system sizing and planning for all of InterSystems products. And you've heard us over the last few years talk about Ansible in various forms. Last year we demonstrated the actual Iris module that Murray created for Ansible. And this year we're going to tie it all together, and we're actually going to show an example of using HealthShare as the example of deployment. Because HealthShare, if anyone have HealthShare today in the deployments? So fair amount. As you know, HealthShare can be complex. There can be configuration drift between them. So here, hopefully, you have some takeaway from the session to maybe apply. You're already using Ansible today, or maybe Chef or Puppet or something similar. But why we chose Ansible, one, it's common. It's certainly available for free. There are paid variants out there from Red Hat and others, but I'm not aware of anyone actually paying for it from Red Hat, since out of the box, Ansible pretty much does everything we need it to do. At the high level, it simplifies complex tasks, whether it's installation of specific things, web servers, Iris instances, HealthShare, so forth. It's just to simplify that. And then also reducing operator error, especially in HealthShare, where you're in the middle of a large upgrade that may take hours or whatnot. You have a lot of instances. Maybe you have 14, 20, 400 namespaces within HealthShare, depending on how many edge gateways you have, access gateways, clinical viewer, so on and so forth. And one of my favorite terms is idempotent. And it's really important on that concept, especially with Ansible, because you can go down a path very quickly of overcomplicating Ansible. And you don't want to do that. You want to resist doing that. You want to make Ansible and your plays be a rock star in doing one thing and one thing really well, and that it's repetitive over and over. So that's the one big key factor you want to take away. You can have a lot of them put together into a playbook, and you have your inventory, your roles, and so forth. You can assign different roles to different kinds of servers. So you really want to get it down to doing one thing extremely well and not creating a playbook that does a lot of things and a lot of variables behind it, because then you end up having drift again. So what we're going to be doing in this session, so we're going to install Apache on each of the servers. We're going to install the HealthShare instances per server. We're going to get down using Iris CPF file, using merge, and then we're going to configure them as registries, edges, so on and so forth. So here is actually a demo, and I'll turn it over to Murray for him to show you the magic. So he's the wizard behind all of this. So I'll give you Murray.
Thanks, Mark. So there's some familiar faces from previous global summits, DevCons, and whatever. So as Mark says, the problem is that we're deploying, especially applications like HealthShare can be quite complex. There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of things can go wrong. So the end result's going to be installing Apache and all those other things, and having HealthShare up and running. Now, if you've been to any of my sessions before, you know that if you ask questions, you get chocolate. If they're short questions, just put your hand up and I'll try and stop and answer it. If they get a bit longer, then we can leave them to the end or take them offline. So I'm going to start just with kick the demo off in the background, and then come back to the slides for a few minutes and talk about what we're doing. So what I've got here on the desk here is just my laptop. It's got Python installed. It's a Mac, so it came with it anyway. And also Ansible. Ansible is just another package for Python. And that's pretty much how easy it is to install Ansible. I'm connected to the internet, so I'm taking my life in my hands here as far as demos go. The servers I'm deploying on are in Sydney, in AWS, so I'm really pushing the boundaries here. Let's just make sure it's all still working. So Ansible is basically, the free version is essentially a command line application. You just run it from your terminal, and I'm going to kick off a playbook, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I'm doing, and I'll let that go in the background, and then I'll just get back to the presentation for a little while. So, when we, Mark and I, create infrastructure instructions for the customers, we have an internal system where we get the details of the customer, demographics, the number of patients and so on, and what health share modules need to be deployed and so on, and we put them into our system and make some adjustments, and eventually a configuration comes out. So it looks more or less like a spreadsheet, so this is what we call the build spreadsheet. Now, whether you're installing health share or track care or some other application, what I'm talking about today is, it's the same workflow. But essentially we have a spreadsheet, and that has a whole lot of information in it. We have some number of hosts. This is a very cut down spreadsheet here. We've got one host, for example, that's going to be our UCR instance. It's got a certain number of namespaces. It's got other applications that have to run, like Apache. And then there's specific configuration for that particular instance, for the UCR instance. What is the number of, the size of the 8K global buffers? What's the GM heap size? At the operating system level, how many huge pages are we going to have for this whole host? So all of this information comes out, and then you've got mirrors, and then you've got, a clinical viewer is going to be on the same host, and it's going to have its own particular requirements. It's not the same size as a UCR. It's going to be sized slightly differently, and there's going to be all sorts of other things that are different. The old way of doing, yeah, certainly.
I already have it. The configuration, is that a minimum amount that you're listing there? That it's not a
No, it's just a light example. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is just an example. It's a made up one.
Okay.
It's like health share, this is a very small one. We can have them with tens of edge gateways and things like that. And depending on the requirements, it can explode out into lots of separate VMs or AWS instances or whatever, or it can collapse down into something more like this, where we're stacking stuff on top of each other. And you even get the situation where you have one VM with 2 edge gateways on it, instances I'm talking about. Cool. So the way the most obvious way first off to install this is you have a bunch of instructions, and it could be, well, for this instance, this is the port numbers, and this is the the routine buffers. Now everything can be different for each instance. So I just wanted to illustrate what we're actually doing here. So we've got a couple of hosts, DB1 and DB3 in the picture here. There's some infrastructure underneath, whether that's AWS instance with some EBS volumes attached, or it's on-premises VMware, it doesn't really matter. But there's some infrastructure there which we're going to assume. Now, Ansible also can install infrastructure, but that's not what we're talking about today. And then on top of that, per host, you've got your operating system, which is going to have its stuff set. And then on top of that, you start to build out. Now we've got our health share instances. And this, like I said, this could be for any application. So we've got our UCR instance, a clinical viewer, EMPI. And you can see they've all got different settings. Like, you obviously need separate port numbers for your, for your instances, different file paths, different namespaces, databases, all of that stuff. So it's all unique per instance. And then you've got mirrors and so on and so forth. So the way Ansible works is it's declarative. You say what I want my system to look like. So this is the infrastructure as code. If you've ever had to deal with containers or anything, it's that philosophy. I want my instance to look like this. I want it to have this memory settings, this files, and if they're not, and you run the Ansible again, it will make it so. If it's not there, it will put it there. If it's different, it will change it. So that's the philosophy behind Ansible. So how does Ansible help? Now I'm going to just do a little bit of high-level stuff here. So obviously we've got a fairly big task here. We've got some number of servers, some number of instances, and they've got to be configured in different ways. So let's put together a deployment plan, and we'll build it into this framework that I'm going to be showing you. So some of the things are specific to the instance, and some are just specific, say, to the operating system. So we've got two levels of stuff going on here. So if we've got our host on the left, it's got an operating system and infrastructure, and we've got Apache, just basic Apache installed as per the basic instructions for setting up best practice for Iris. And then there's the common stuff. We're going to be preparing the operating system and installing Apache, but then there's a whole lot of stuff that's unique to the instance. Things like the Iris version, the different Iris modules for HealthShare, some of them use different Iris install kits. They're not all the same kit. So you need to be able to now describe to your system, well, I need all these different kits depending on whether I'm installing UCR or Clinical Viewer, for example. In the demo, I also set up terminal access, and I do that because I want to run some some terminal commands, Iris terminal commands as well, and that's something you can turn off afterwards. But that's a helper for me because that means I can call out to some just native Iris stuff at the same time. And then there's Apache configuration, and then application, and then at the end I always do a post-flight. Like working in AWS, every time I run this up, if I'm running up not a production system but a test system, all the IP addresses and host names are all crazy in AWS, so I always give myself a little list at the end, a cheat sheet of what's happened and what the names were and all of those things. Now, at that application configuration point is really a jumping off point. We've built this, all the requirements we have, the things that were in that spreadsheet around what our HealthShare implementation is going to be. So we've built the file paths, we've made sure the right permissions are on those. We've done the things, kernel settings at the operating system and all of those type of things we want to do. But it's not unusual, and it's, for example, to use IPM for payer services. That's how they install their stuff. So there's no point replicating all of that in Ansible when we actually have a deployment model for that already. For HealthShare, we have the Francois bot, named after Francois Lafloc, who's not here, luckily. But he's written a HealthShare installer. He, in fact, presented it a couple of years ago here at Global Summit. And so in the framework, it's an opportunity to call out to what he's done, although we do some massaging as we call out, and I'll show you that too. Just finishing off with the Ansible controller, so that's, in this case, my laptop. It could be a Bastion host, it could be something within the infrastructure itself. It's just an operating system instance, whether it's Mac or Ubuntu or Red Hat, that's running Python and Ansible and has a bunch of text files copied up there, YAML files. And that's about all it is. It's not really that fancy. We run playbooks, and within those there's tasks to do, and there's modules as well. So what modules are in Ansible is they're discrete pieces of Python code usually that do a task. Now that might be as simple as copying a file. So there's a file module, and the way you call it, you say file, and then there's just some parameters: source, destination, maybe something like permissions. You know, remember we're saying declarative, what it's going to be. Well, it's going to be the source is here, but the destination document's going to be this. It might even change its name. The permissions are going to be that. If you run this again and the permissions had changed, then they're going to change. So we've also got modules for like Iris install and some other Iris tasks as well. And they're what they call community modules. And when I say community, I mean supported by the community. These are not InterSystems product. We should be very clear about that. So last year I published some stuff to GitHub and to the community.intersystems.com, and I'll do the same with what I've done today. So the key to all of this is, you know, the whole idea of Ansible with the controller. You got, you know, central orchestration. We can do parallel execution, so that's very powerful. You know, you're not just dealing with one host at a time. You can go across your whole fleet or some subset that you define, and everything's just done over SSH. As long as you can make an SSH connection from the controller to the host, you're good. If you can do it, so there just needs to be that trust there, and there's any number of ways you do that. You know, if you've ever SSH to another host, you know what I'm talking about. And you can set that up so it happens without any prompting. So what I needed to do was take this basic Ansible model and then make it so I could do it per instance. So this is the sort of the trick here, is I've made it so I'm using Ansible not to just go against a host, but in fact to say I'm going against an instance. And so that's how the scripts are written. So it's all Ansible, it's all just plain Ansible, but I'm just using it in a slightly different way so that I can address the hosts. So the way you do that is in Ansible, very powerful thing is variables. So variables, just like any scripting language, it's, you know, key value. If it's a text field, you know, its instance name is UCR, its port number is this. So as long as those variables are set and the script runs, it will pick them up. So, you know, my name is, and then you put it between curly brackets, and, you know, it is. So for example, here is the Iris installer module piece of code. It's in Ansible. You can see it's very easy to read. You know, it's got a name, and then you say Iris installs silent, and then there's a bunch of parameters. And so, for example, the instance name is passed in. So just imagine this is your Iris silent installer, but instead of putting it in environment variables and mucking around with all of that, you just put it into a parameterized way like this. So things like, you know, the port number or the install directory, or in fact the Iris installer path is actually that will expand out to whatever the kit is that we're going to be picking up. You know, if it's clinical viewer, it's at one kit. If it's UCR, it's another one, for example. But you can see that that's what we've got is one piece of code, one script, but its personality changes depending what those variables are. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get in here. The way you describe your servers and your instances in Ansible is you have like a host file. And so the host file, it's a little bit small writing. It'll be a bit bigger when I come back to the demo. But essentially, it's a hierarchical structure. I've got all, and then indented in that, I've got production servers, and then some number of hosts are in there as production servers. And then I've got non-production servers and some number of hosts. And I've got utility servers, which might be my monitoring, for example. So I can set variables at the group level. So I can say I'm going to set a default variable as Iris port is 1972 for production DB servers. But then I can override that at the host level, or in fact what you'll see is we'll override that at the instance level. So you can have a default, but then as you sort of cascade down these levels, you can override these variables. But the powerful thing is that you just have lists of variables and that describes your environment that you're going to be deploying.
So you can actually specify the variables per host.
So you spoke, you get a chocolate.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know you could do this.
Yeah.
In a host file with different variables, I thought it was just.
You want to catch one-handed?
Thanks.
What?
I should have known.
There we go. Somebody's got a free one. Yes. Yeah, so that is actually like the magic to this. It just makes it so easy to work with. You write a script once, and then depending on the variables, it's what's going to happen. You can sort of get a rule of thumb, a best practice for Ansible is it's not a programming language. Okay, if you start to do some programming in there, you should be thinking about another way. That's why I've got modules, for example, to encapsulate the stuff we do with the Iris install, for example. Yeah.
So it appears that the kinds of changes that can be made to an Ansible file could be very broad or very narrow.
Yeah.
So is there some way to know whether, for instance, you need downtime on an instance in order to execute this, or you can do it without any downtime?
No, that would be just. That would be just. No, you would have to know that it'd be like any other sort of. You'd run it on your test system first and understand. There's so many sort of like little backstories and channels I could go down here, but for example, how you structure your script to say, for example, I've done a lot of the common stuff first, and then the per instance stuff I do separately because I don't want to be stomping on top of my Iris instances. So there's ways you can run stuff in parallel, and if you're deploying, 20 edge gateways, you're quite happy to run all of that in parallel. But no, it's not. That's not built into it.
Yeah, I mean, like on an edge gateway, if I wanted to change the timeout
Yeah.
setting, which is like the lowest level applications,
Yeah.
would I do that by running a full Ansible playbook and expecting it to leave everything?
What I would do is, once you've got this framework, you don't have to run it all, and I'll show you how you do that, actually. I'll come back. Yeah. Yep.
Is there a way to have this int-ready sort of dynamically generated or retrieved at runtime where it's
Yes.
not statically defined?
So, in fact, that one there, for example, that's on AWS. I actually have a Python script that goes out to the AWS infrastructure, pulls it back, formats it as an inventory file, and actually just puts it there. Because I run this over and over again. I was too lazy to build it all the time. So you could build it. It's just a put in your mind the reason to put things in modules, the programming bits, is everything else is just a text file. You're just doing text manipulation. So it's actually really pretty easy to do stuff like that. I've got to get my throwing better. So you can see on the left-hand side there like a file structure. And Ansible has a default file structure. If you use that, things are really easy. If you want to use some other structure, you can, but then you've got to start putting path names and things in. So you can see, like, I've got my group variables, I've got my all, I've got a folder for my Iris DB servers, so the broad group of DB servers, and then within that I might have production DB servers, for example. And then the host variables, and then down the bottom I've got instance variables. So the instance variables are, like the clinical viewer file systems and the instance information itself, for example. Now, that looks like a lot of work as well, but for our internal tool, our estimating system, we press a button and those spreadsheets come out. You can press a button and the YAML files come out, so it's just a copy and paste. So it's not as onerous as it looks like. And I'll show you inside real soon, because we're going to go back to the demo and look at stuff. Okay, so it's finished. So, just lost my mouse. So this is just a terminal session. So if I go back a little way, all this green stuff is output from the Francois bot, okay? when we installed HealthShare, we in fact, I specifically output the information. I could have just as easily said, I put it like in a debug mode so it all came out. But also, just as an example, you know, I did a restart of Iris at the end of it. So that's a task, it's a step that happened on this server here, and it puts it out. And at the end, you get a summary of what happened. So on DB01, there was 39 things were changed. 39 steps were okay. There was 8 changes because I cheated. I actually installed before and then I ran it again. And so one of the idempotent aspects of Ansible is that, well, if something had been set already, it's just going to either skip that step or it's going to end up being the same anyway. So you can see there I skipped a bunch of steps. Otherwise this demo would go on for about an hour and 10 minutes. So this output here can either be, you can log it, it doesn't have to come out to the screen. But let's just go and have a look at what I was really doing. So here's my IDE, and here's the inventory file that I was using. And so is that big enough? At the back of the room you can see okay? Cool. And so you can see I've got all under there as DB servers, then I've got my production servers here, and they've got some attributes like things like an IP address, and that's when I was talking about AWS has like these really odd names. Then down further I've got, this is the actual one. I don't have non-production servers in here, not like the one on the slide. And I've got some, you know, like a monitor server as well, running Ubuntu, which I'm going to be using for like Prometheus and Grafana or whatever I'm using to monitor the system. So when we have a look at the group variables, for example, if I have a look under the so it's all just folders and files, that's all it is. So if I have a look at under group variables, I've got some variables. I've got some kernel stuff. So I'm setting some kernel settings. Remember, this is for the group called DB servers. So for DB servers, I always make these same kernel settings for Iris best practice. Production or non-production, I could actually sort of like start to split them off more. Here's some common application packages I install with YUM or DNF. So these are just lists, but later on in the Ansible script, it'll say run the YUM or DNF, which is the package manager for Red Hat, and here is the list of things I want you to install. So it's a very simple structure. You know, I've got this, this list of variables could get longer or shorter. You can in fact see I've got specific common ones, the Ubuntu and Red Hat, and then Red Hat specific. But if, like any variable in any scripting language, I just have to say common application packages plus the Red Hat ones, and that whole list will be installed on a Red Hat server, for example, but not on Ubuntu. So let's go along a little bit further. So let's talk about the instance variables. These are the ones I was talking about which are not native to Ansible. You won't see them on most other Ansible systems, but there's no reason why I couldn't put a directory there called instance variables and then have subdirectories for the host. So DB01 was the host. Oh, sorry. If I actually show it to you, there it is. Can you read? The left-hand side's a little bit small. So what it has in it, though, is a directory called DB01, and we've got clinical viewer, EMPI, and UCR. So if I go and have a look at what's in the UCR file system, it's just some variables with the file system paths for the UCR. If I looked at the patient index one, it's different. The same way if I look at the instance variables, so the instance, so any variable that I wanted to change for UCR, I put in the instance YAML file. And so you can see there's some obvious things, what's the instance name, but also, what's the GM heap size of this instance? What's the super server port number of this instance? So like I said, you could do this by hand, but our estimating system, the idea is that you make this as hands-off as possible, and you could go and change it. Even things like the CPU, number of CPUs, or the size of the huge pages, because you'll be wanting to calculate what's the total huge pages for this OS instance.
Excuse me, can you go back to the OS settings?
Yeah. Yep. Where were they? Up the top.
Yeah, so, okay, so we have multiple values for
Right.
legislation.
Yeah, I should have. I would. Watch your head.
It's a distance.
Yeah, got the right distance that time at least. Yeah, without getting too far into the weeds, a variable can have, they can be different data structure types. So the top ones are just like key value. The bottom one is in fact a list. So you can in fact have a dictionary as well, like in sort of Python-y type thinking. But yeah, it's well pointed out. So for example, the one that installs the operating system goes through a loop. Internally in the module, it'll just loop over whatever list you pass it, for example. Whereas if I stay on track, I think we'll get things will sort of unfold hopefully as we go through. So here's the main thing, the main driver of an Ansible playbook. So in our case, we're installing Iris on database servers. So this one playbook will install Iris on a database server. It's got some, it's saying, I'm going to work over the Iris DB servers. Remember, we've got this structure in our inventory file, the way we split things out. I could just as easily have said production DB servers. And Arnie, the question you were asked, I think it was you who were asking, well, somebody asked, can you do one thing at a time? Well, this would be a way you could actually say, I want to just do something over DB01 or all the production DB servers. And we can drill down further, and you do that by using these tags here. So I could run the command, and in fact, I did. The command The command I ran, because I only wanted the demo to run for a certain time, I've passed it some parameters, but I've got a tag here, hsdemo. So what happened is, it came in, it always runs pre-flight, which picks up my variables and does some other checking to make sure some files are in place. But then it just jumped in at that tag there, hsdemo, and ran this particular group of tasks here. Okay, so if I've got a big fleet of stuff and I want to make a change on one thing, one change, I could use tags and just go and do that one thing. I could create a playbook to sit beside this one and just address that one thing I want to do on that one host or across all hosts or whatever. So there's lots of ways to slice and dice this. That wasn't the end, was it? It says 10 minutes here.
Yeah, we got 10 minutes,
yeah. Yeah, cool. And I've got heaps of chocolate left, so ask lots of questions. So we're in a playbook. It runs through, it's like a batch file. Just goes 1, 2, 3, 4. What happens at each step, unless you tell it otherwise, it will run the task across all, say 10 hosts fell into the group that we're running over. That same task in hsdemo, for example, is going to run across all 10 tasks in parallel. If I leave the defaults, it'll wait till they all finish and then move on to the next one. You can also set a setting that basically just says go for your life, and it will just run the playbook against each host, but it won't wait for the other guys to catch up. So it depends on what your requirements are, whether you want to do that.
Can you repeat that again as far as
Sure. So, yeah, so what's happening here, as the tasks are running, it just starts at the top of the playbook. I'll show you a task in a minute, which will sort of explain a bit more, but you can see the names, you know, like the second one down, look for the word role. Role, iris number 10, prepare OS, for example. That's where it applied those kernel settings and things. Next one down, role, iris 20, install iris instance. So what happens is if it's running across 10 hosts, it will run the same group of commands across each of those 10 hosts in parallel, but it will wait until they all finish before it moves on to the install iris step. Or you can just set a flag or a setting in Ansible and say, don't do that, just keep doing it, and if they get out of step, it doesn't matter because they're all going to finish eventually. If any particular host fails for some reason, there was some reason for the install to fail on that host, all the others keep going and that guy just stops. But everybody else keeps going.
And that's based on what flag? Or what's that?
You put that in like a Ansible configuration file. I've just left it at the defaults, to be honest. So let's go and look at a role. What's a good one? So install iris. So we've got our install iris role here. So the way that Ansible works is everything's in files and folders. So we have a folder called roles. I don't know why it's called roles. It doesn't actually make sense to me. And then we have a role here called install iris instance. The only reason I got numbers in there is so I can keep them in order and it's easier for me to read them. And then in here I've got some tasks. I've got a bunch of tasks and they're just YAML files. So let's go and have a look at the iris installed task. So I should say there's a main task always, and that just sort of sets the order within this task of I'm going to do this and then this, and these are the steps I'm going to take. They're basically like an include file in programming. And then one of the include file here, silent install of iris, include that task, which is this guy. And so there's some verbiage at the top, says what I'm doing, and then I'm overriding the installer path based on the operating system. In this case, I'm only working on Red Hat. So I've got a couple of variables here stuck together, and then here's my actual module that I showed you in the PowerPoint. And then it's just got those there, and then at the end I display the result. I copy the key file. So within the structure here I've got a key file which is encrypted. Ansible has encryption built in, and then stop and start iris to apply the key. So that's a nice simple one. You can see in here in the parameters for the silent install, for example, we've got the path to a merge file too. So I can do CPF merge at this point if I want, or I can do it later. Let's go and have a look at the health share one. Oops. So the health share one, for example, is I'm actually the first tasks I do are to copy up some files from my controller here to the host or the hosts, whichever ones I'm hitting, put them in a location, and then I'm going to, and what they are, these files are the health share installer files that Francois wrote. So I want to copy them up, and then I'm going to compile them on this new instance of iris, right? But also, and the way that Francois set this up, he uses a configuration file as well to drive his installer. So one of the things that Ansible has is these J2 files. It stands for Ginger2, not J2, our partner. So what J2 files do is, as I do the copy, it will do the substitutions. So it's not as clear because this IDE doesn't know what Francois's format is, but for example, this string here, UCR equals, and you can see there's a variable in there. UCR is this IP, and this is the port number that we're using for UCR, for example. So, and so on and so forth in my file. So this is very powerful as well. So you could have essentially template files set up for any configurations you're doing or anything like that. But as they're copied from the source to the destination, the substitutions are made by Ansible so that when I go to run this in the installer, at that step in the installer, then it picks up that file because it's in the manager directory and will have the right values there for IP address and things. So you're not going and editing config files on the fly for things that are variables either. So all of that is set way back at the beginning, remember, when we set the variables for the by instance type. So when that installer runs, depending on what installer and so on, or what the target is, those variables will change. The last thing I'll show you is this idea of modules. The way Ansible works is essentially what it does is it takes, say I'm doing an Iris install. The Iris silent install is in fact let's look at this. Iris start and stop, for example. This is a wrapper, a Python wrapper around the Iris command as well. I didn't create a giant Python program for all the things that the Iris, Iris list, Iris that, all of these things do. But I picked out, so like, do one thing well, pick out this start and stop, and then create a task for that. This Python file will be copied to the target into a temporary location. It's run. Any return stuff is sent back to the controller. That's the way Ansible works. And then the cleanup is done. So any modules I write, that's how they're sent and run on the remote host. That's how most of the Ansible modules themselves work. So let's just jump back. I don't think there's really much more to say, unless you've got some questions. I've lost my PowerPoint. Oh, actually what I should show you in my last few minutes, show you health share. Did it actually run? What did I put in? Firefox. So I also installed Prometheus and Grafana. So we've got Prometheus running. We've got, let's get... Yeah, so unfortunately I changed the password, like I set a password on the way through. I should have just left it as sys, shouldn't I?
So it's not a capital sys, so everyone knows.
Yeah, I should have just left it at that, shouldn't I? Oh. Yeah, I should have, shouldn't I?
There's an audit event.
Hey. Okay, so yay. So the system config stuff is there. Like we actually set, you probably didn't notice, but we set like routine buffers and things to be something specific. If I go and look at the health share stuff, what I know about health share, you could write on the back of a postage stamp. So there's the installer wizard. Who knows what else? Let's look at it. Yeah.
All the different instances.
Yeah, so this health share was installed as per Francois. He gave me the script to run the Francois bot at that step. The last question you asked is, so one of the things, because Ansible deals really well with all these text files and things, I set, so for example, DB03, I knew enough to be able to configure Prometheus and Grafana dashboards with and populate it with the host names of the things I was installing today as well. So this is the old SAM dashboard. SAM was just Grafana, if you didn't know, and then it was just wrapped in some other stuff. So you can still run Prometheus and Grafana and hit the /metrics endpoint for Iris and bring up stuff as well. This is just the Prometheus YAML file was just populated from out of Ansible as well.
And it's pulling the REST API metrics.
Yeah.
The metrics endpoint.
Yeah. So that one's got a permissions problem, but if I hit this guy here, you can see all the stuff. So we've got to the end. I did have a SSH. So we've got the 3 instances. It's pretty slow. We're going to Sydney and back. Or I should just say we're out of time. Well. That's what it looks like here. You've got 3 instances. Let me just flash up so you got the final stuff. So we did it. What else can I do? Lots of things. Questions? If you go to community and you just search for my name, I have a list of the Ansible stuff I did last year and other stuff besides. And once I publish this, I'll put it up. But remember, again, everything I've shown you, the Ansible stuff, is all community. It's not InterSystems product. But you can contact me, and when I publish it, you ask questions and so on. And it'll be on GitHub too. And that's it.